Now that we've gone through the layering of the skin, it's time to get into some other features and parts of the skin, looking into skin coloration as well as functionality of the skin. We'll start with the skin coloration. Now, skin color is based on three main pigments. We have melanin, as we know came from melanocytes. We're going to have carotene and hemoglobin. So three different things that are all impacting skin coloration. Let's start with melanin. We know melanin is produced by melanocytes. We know those melanocytes are found in the epidermis in the stratum basale. Now, this melanin is going to be the main pigment of your skin. It's what has the majority of the impact on what your skin coloration is going to be. There's two different ways that we're producing melanin here, or two different styles, I should say. You're going to have this eumelanin, which is more of a yellowish brown color to it. It's more traditionally what you think of when you think of melanin. But then you also have the pheomelanin. Now this one's more of a reddish tinge to it. Now a lot of times you might think of the reddish tinge more as blood from hemoglobin, but it's also a derivative of melanin here. So we're looking at the two different styles there. And both these melanins are going to accumulate in the stratum basale as well as in the stratum spinosum. Now, they might be produced in the stratum basale and have a lot of accumulation there, but that accumulation moves up into the stratum spinosum. By the time you leave the stratum spinosum, you're not really accumulating up there as much. So it's more of a deeper aspect here that's occurring down in these two layers. But the number of melanocytes are the same. Doesn't matter what color your skin is, from the lightest to the darkest, to everything in between. The number of melanocytes are pretty much the same. What's varying is how much melanin is being accumulated in the actual cells, in those keratinocytes. The darker the skin, the more melanin is being accumulated and held onto for a little bit longer period of time. So you can see that the idea here is dark skin, more melanin. You're having it more made, but you're also accumulating more. Now, the thing to keep in mind though is, you can't just store melanin for long periods of time, because that melanin is inside the different keratinocytes. And as those cells progress up towards the surface, from the stratum basale, up to the stratum spinosum, up to the stratum granulosum, you're moving that melanin. Eventually, the melanin is to be gone as the keratinocytes are also gone. So you can't just have a long-term storage. It has to be a constant production. And that production is based on what your genetics are for skin pigmentation, as well as UV exposure. Because when you're exposed to UV radiation, or basically sunlight, the sunlight itself is going to have about a 10-day window when it peaks afterwards. So from that exposure, you'll keep increasing melanin production for about 10 days afterwards. Beyond that 10-day window, give or take, the melanin production goes back to what your standard kind of genetic level is. But if you keep elevated UV exposure, then you'll keep elevated levels of melanin production. Pretty much it's your body's way of trying to say, you know what, you have UV damage here. We're going to make more melanin to try to prevent future UV damage. That's why in the case of summertime, for example, if people spend time outdoors, the skin naturally gets darker and darker because you have more UV exposure, more sunlight exposure. And as long as you keep staying outside and having more sun exposure, the melanin levels will keep increasing. But then if you start to not be outside as much, melanin levels will start to back off again because you're not needing the protection from the UV radiation. So it's all about trying to keep those nuclei protected so UV isn't causing radiation damage to the cells, but potentially causing mutations in the cells. Because any mutation, any damage to the DNA could cause the cell to go awry, to cause problems, grow erratically. So your body's trying to naturally protect it from UV radiation. So looking at the skin here, you can see you have a darker pigment and a lighter pigmented skin. You're noticing still the same melanocyte, but you can see how the amount of accumulation of melanin is different. You don't have the same sheer amount of melanin production. So the skin coloration is based on melanin production as well as accumulation in the skin. So as I already mentioned, it's protecting from the UV radiation because the DNA inside your nuclei can become damaged with enough UV radiation. And that damage can lead to wrinkles, can lead to the skin sagging, not being as taut, can potentially lead to cancer. Because if enough mutations occur, and the right mutations occur, can trigger a cancerous growth. As well as the last one down there, folic acid breakdown. Your body needs folic acid to function properly. Well, in the case of UV radiation, it can break that down so the cells won't have adequate amounts of folic acid, and again, not functioning properly. So sometimes, though, there's localized accumulation of melanin. Now, all these different examples, you can see freckles and moles. They're basically localized accumulation of melanin at that one point. Now, freckles and moles, those aren't necessarily bad. I mean, sometimes you hear of moles being cancerous. That's possible. But not every mole is cancerous. So when you start looking into this, and we'll talk about this more later on in the chapter, but you'll have certain key things to look for if it's occurring in a mole or a freckle. But for the most part, sun exposure just can increase freckles because it increases localized accumulation of melanin. Moles themselves are just, the melanocyte accumulates more and produces more there. So freckles and moles, not necessarily a problem, but based off of melanin accumulation. Other skin accumulation, carotene. Carotene gives more of a yellowish to almost an orange pigment. So this kind of yellowish orange, you don't think of skin as yellow-orange, but it plays a part in the overall tone of the skin. So you mix this with the pigmentation from melanin, and that's what's partially creating. The last part that contributes is hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin is going to be a protein-based structure that's inside your red blood cells. Hemoglobin is going to bind your oxygen molecules for distribution throughout your body. Well, when oxygen binds to hemoglobin, it has the traditional reddish color. We know that we mentioned there's capillary loops up in the dermal papillae, so just below the epidermis. The more blood that goes in those dermal papillae, in the capillary loops, the more reddish tone is going to be there. That's why if you're exercising, you're working out, your skin's becoming warmer and more blood is getting there, is having more reddish tinge. If someone's blushing as a reaction, that's more blood rushing to the surface of the skin. If someone feels hot because of temperature, more blood is going to the skin's surface to try to cool off, causes more of a reddish tinge. So the hemoglobin itself can cause not necessarily always a permanent coloration, but it's more dependent on emotions, temperature, exercise, things like that. But together, hemoglobin, keratin, and the actual melanin is what really creates your skin tone, what your coloration is. All right, let's shift gears into the purpose or the functions of skin. So first off, protection. Now your skin is having many different ways it protects your body. The first one we'll talk about is physical protection. Sure, the skin is a physical barrier. It prevents things from entering in, but also prevents things from coming out. So really it's kind of a formidable barrier there. Helps with prevention of bacterial entry. As long as your skin's intact, it's not really going to allow bacteria to pass through. Now, with that being said, there can be microscopic tears in your skin that you're not even aware of. That happens. Bacteria can get in. That's where other methods come to play then. waterproofing. We mentioned the idea of lamellation or laminating, helping to waterproof the skin as those keratinocytes are moving from the deepest to the most superficial layers. And protection from abrasion. I'm saying, hold on, you fall down and skin that can cause abrasions. But not every single thing you bump against or touch causes an abrasion on the skin. So it does give you some resistance to abrasion. Not everything, obviously, but can definitely help out. So not every impact is causing damage. All right, second form of protection, chemical protection. In the case of chemical protection, your skin actually has many different chemicals that are going to help out protecting your body underneath. Let's start with the low pH of your skin. On your skin surface, the pH is actually a little lower than it would be at the neutral point. This slightly lower pH helps to slow the growth of bacteria. Now that's important because you're thinking, hold on, there's bacteria in our skin, we already mentioned that. Those bacteria are fine. Bacteria that aren't necessarily normally there, the ones that shouldn't be there, their growth can be slowed down by the lower pH. Sebum. We mentioned that you have sebaceous glands in your skin. Sebaceous glands produce sebum, or oil. This oily substance, this sebum, as it's secreted onto your skin surface, will also help to limit or slow down bacterial growth. So this lipid-based solution is going to help reduce bacterial growth on your skin. It also helps with killing bacteria in the sebum, but that works in conjunction with this one, the human defensin. Human defensin is actually kind of like an antibiotic that your skin produces. It's meant to kill and prevent even the growth of any future bacteria that shouldn't be there. Now, obviously, we still get some bacteria in our skin that shouldn't be there, but these are all ways that try to limit or reduce the amount of bacteria that are present. And then melanin. We just spent a couple minutes talking about melanin, but it's a chemical. Melanin helps prevent and protect your skin from UV damage. So different chemicals, from a low pH solution, sebum, human defensin, melanin, they're all playing a part in having different protective measures, preventing things from damaging your skin or getting into your skin. All right, we went from physical to chemical, now to biological protection. In the case of biological protection, these are the living cells in your skin and how they help protect. Start off with the Langerhans cells. Remember, the Langerhans cells were up in the epidermis. These are phagocytotic cells. Their whole purpose is to find any bacteria or pathogen, for that matter, that got past those chemical defenses and the barrier and got into the skin. So this is more like your first line of defense for your immune system. Once things are getting into the epidermis, you try to kill them off. But sometimes things get past the epidermis into the dermis. Inside the dermis, you're going to have these macrophages. Now, macrophages are simply cells that are phagocytotic and meant to destroy something else. In this case, we're looking at destroying pathogens, but it could also be destroying broken cells, dead cells, things you don't need anymore. This is more like a second line defense. Epidermis was first. Dermis is more along the lines of the second line defense with these phagocytotic cells. And these phagocytotic cells, a lot of them are your white blood cells. White blood cells that were in the blood, but they went and left the bloodstream to go out into surrounding tissues to become phagocytotic and fight any potential pathogen or infection. All right, some other functions of the skin besides protection, because there's a lot of protection there, but by temperature regulation. We mentioned in the dermal papillae, you're going to have those tiny capillary loops. By increasing the amount of blood that goes in the capillary loops, you bring more heat from your core out into the skin surface. The sweat from the sweat glands gets the liquid on the surface, the heat from the capillary loops gets into the sweat and evaporates off. So it can help with reducing body heat, getting rid of excess heat. But we also have the thermoreceptors. Thermoreceptors, temperature, hot and cold. So I only discussed if you're warm so far. We haven't gotten to the cold too much. But the brain is going to respond either way. We know, and we just mentioned, the heat response. Here's the cold response. If those receptors say, hey, we're cold, besides the shivering, trying to generate more heat that way, those capillary loops in the dermal papillae, they're going to shrivel up. They're going to get smaller or vasoconstrict. As the blood vessels vasoconstrict on the surface of your skin, that's going to prevent blood from going up there and keep blood deeper in the layers of the skin. Now, there's still enough to keep the skin healthy, but you're trying to make sure there's not too much body heat going up the skin surface. So your brain is not only controlling the heat aspect for evaporative cooling, sweat glands, and the more blood into the capillaries, but also the cold side of things, which is going to cut down blood flow to the skin. More blood flow stays in the body, therefore less body heat can be lost from those capillary loops and the blood vessels in the skin. So it goes both warm and cold regulation based on those thermoreceptors. So all those thermoreceptors signals the brain. The brain is going to then say, hey, we know what to do. Here's the process. Stimulus reception. Well, there's many different types of stimulus, but remember we talked about the light touch, the deep pressure. Those are some of the stimuli that your skin can receive. We mentioned the nociceptors, pain. Thermoreceptors, just mentioned. So a lot of different stimulus reception. From the light being Meissner's and Merkel, to the deep being Passinian. So all this is inside. Hopefully things you kind of remember at this point, we talked about. So this is all different receptors. Pain, that could be bare nerve endings, nociceptors, extreme heat and cold, plus the thermoreceptors. Synthesis of vitamin D precursor. So this isn't vitamin D itself yet, but as the sunlight comes in and hits your skin, that will trigger a reaction to cholecalciferol. Now, the cholecalciferol then can be produced and turned into calcidiol. Now, the calcidiol can then go and be converted into calcitriol. The calcitriol is an active form of vitamin D. That's what your body uses. So you're going through this process from this precursor, step by step, to make the finished product your body can use for vitamin D. Now, that's not an excuse to go, I need to be out in the sun for 10 hours. No. If you're in a t-shirt, shorts, out in the sun, 10, 15 minutes is all you need. If it's the winter time, you're all bundled up, and the only sun exposure is your face, it's going to take a little longer. But it's not hours and hours. Plus, you can still get vitamin D in the foods you ingest. This is just a nice helping hand to get more vitamin D in the system. Excretion. Your skin can excrete right through. Now, I put up here nitrogenous waste. Now, sure, most nitrogenous waste is going through urination, but your skin can actually have some of it seeping out to help with the process of getting rid of excess nitrogenous waste products. So it helps a little bit with excretion as well. Just a few things your skin can work on. So coloration based on melanin, carotene, and hemoglobin, and then the various functions from protection to vitamin D precursors to temperature regulation. The skin really can do a lot of things.